The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and Corporal Ethan Calloway saw Sonhar Prime for the first time through a small round window. The planet looked like someone had wrapped a pearl in light. Clouds of gold and silver moved across its surface, and even from orbit, the cities below seemed to glow. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and whispered to himself, "Don't mess this up." He was not an important man. He knew that. He was 26 years old, born in a small town in Oregon, and he had joined the United Earth Diplomatic Corps, not because he wanted to see the stars, but because it paid better than the factory where his father worked. Now here he was, a security guard for a minor human delegation, traveling to the throne world of the Valanthi Empire for something called the Grand Harmonic Summit. The Valanthi were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. They were tall, nearly 8 feet, with skin that shifted colors like oil on water. They spoke in song, not like humans sang. Their entire language was built from melody and vibration. Every word was a note, every sentence was music. Their cities were made of crystal that carried sound for miles, and their civilization was considered one of the most beautiful in the known universe. Humans, on the other hand, were new. Earth had only made contact with the Galactic Concord 12 years ago, and humanity had been given the rank of Class 7 primitive species. It was the lowest rank. It meant they were allowed to attend events, but not to speak unless spoken to. They could watch, they could listen, they could not matter. Ambassador Lynn Vasquez gathered the small human team in the shuttle bay before they landed. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled tight and eyes that could cut steel. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "We are guests here. There are species at this summit that have been part of the Concord for 10,000 years. We have been here for 12. If any one of you does anything to embarrass this delegation, I will personally make sure you spend the rest of your career guarding a weather station on Neptune. Are we clear?" Everyone nodded. She looked directly at Ethan. "Calloway, you are posted on the East Garden Terrace. It is far from the main halls. You will stand there. You will be quiet. You will not talk to anyone. You will not touch anything. You are furniture. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." They landed an hour later, and the world took Ethan's breath away. The Valanthi Palace rose from the ground like a frozen song. Towers of pale crystal twisted into the sky, humming faintly with vibrations he could feel in his teeth. The air smelled like rain and something sweet he could not name. Everywhere he looked, alien delegates moved in groups, their voices filling the halls with sounds that were strange and beautiful and completely beyond him. He found his post on the East Garden Terrace and stood at attention. Below him was a wide garden filled with silver-leafed trees and pools of still water that reflected the sky. It was peaceful. It was quiet. It was lonely. For 2 days, nothing happened. He stood. He watched. He ate his meals alone in a small room with the other security staff. He listened to the distant music of the summit and tried not to feel like a ghost. On the 3rd day, he noticed her. She was sitting alone on a stone bench in the garden below his terrace. She was Valanthi, but young, maybe the equivalent of a 12-year-old human girl. Her skin was a soft shade of violet that barely shifted, unlike the bright swirling colors of the adults he had seen. She was small for her kind, thin with large dark eyes that seemed too heavy for her face. She was watching the summit through a tall window at the far end of the garden. Inside, Ethan could see delegates performing a ceremonial exchange of songs. The music was powerful enough to make the walls hum. But the girl just sat there, her hands pressed flat against the glass, her body still, her face filled with something that Ethan recognized immediately. It was the look of someone standing outside a world they could not enter. He had seen that look before. He had seen it on his sister Mia's face when she was 6 years old, sitting at the dinner table while everyone else laughed at a joke she could not hear. Mia had been born deaf. completely, profoundly deaf. And Ethan had learned sign language before he learned to ride a bicycle, because he refused to live in a world where his sister could not talk to him. He watched the Volanthi girl press her fingers harder against the glass, as if she was trying to feel the music through the stone. 2 attendants stood nearby, but they did not look at her. They did not speak to her. They stood like guards at a prison, not caretakers of a child. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He tried to ignore it. He was furniture. He was not supposed to care. But he kept watching. He noticed that when an attendant needed the girl to move, they touched her shoulder and pointed. When they wanted her to eat, they placed food in front of her. When they wanted her to stop doing something, they gently took her hands and held them still. There were no words, no signs, no language of any kind. Just physical commands, like training a pet. And the girl obeyed every time, with the empty mechanical obedience of someone who had given up. Ethan's hands tightened at his sides. He thought of Mia again. Mia, who could tell jokes in sign language that made entire rooms laugh. Mia, who had graduated from college, who had friends, who had a life, because someone had given her a language that fit her hands. This girl had nothing. She was not just unable to hear the Volanthi song language. She had no language at all. She was locked inside her own mind, with no door and no key. The girl turned suddenly, as if she felt his gaze. Their eyes met across the distance of the terrace. Her expression shifted into something guarded and afraid, the look of a creature expecting to be pitied or ignored. Ethan did not look away. He did not smile politely and turn his head like everyone else probably did. He just looked at her, steady and calm, and in that moment something passed between them that needed no sound and no song. She stared back, confused, curious, waiting. And Ethan Calloway, who had been told to stand still and stay quiet, felt the first crack form in his obedience. Ethan did not sleep well that night. He lay on his narrow cot in the human quarters and stared at the ceiling and thought about the girl in the garden. He told himself it was not his business. He told himself he was a soldier, not a teacher. He told himself that getting involved with a Volanthi royal could end his career and maybe his freedom. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her hands pressed against the glass, reaching for music she would never hear. The next morning, he returned to his post on the east terrace. The girl was there again. Same bench, same stillness, same attendants standing nearby like statues. Ethan watched her for an hour. She drew shapes on the ground with her finger. Spirals, circles, lines that went nowhere. It was not art. It was frustration. She was trying to put something out into the world and had no way to do it. He made his decision before he fully understood he was making it. He walked down the stone steps to the garden level. The attendants noticed him and stiffened. One of them made a sharp sound, a warning note in the Volanthi language. Ethan held up his hands, palms open, the universal gesture of peace, and kept walking slowly. The girl saw him coming and pulled back on the bench, pressing herself against the armrest. Her eyes went wide. People did not approach her. People looked through her, or stepped around her, the way you walk around a piece of furniture you feel sorry for. Ethan stopped a few feet away, and knelt down so he was at her eye level. He could see her face clearly now. Up close, her skin had faint patterns like fingerprints, swirling across her cheeks. Her eyes were dark purple, deep and intelligent, and afraid. He took a slow breath. Then he raised his right hand, pressed it to his chest, and opened it outward toward her. Hello. It was the simplest sign he knew. He had taught it to Mia before she turned 2. The girl stared at his hand. She did not understand the word, of course, but something in her expression changed. She had seen her attendants use hand signals before, basic commands, but this was different. This gesture had a shape, a direction, an intention. It was not telling her to do something, it was offering something. She looked at his hand, then at his face, then back at his hand. Slowly, carefully, she raised her own hand and copied the movement. Palm to chest, open outward. Ethan smiled. He nodded. Then he pointed to himself and made the sign for his name, fingerspelling ETHAN, with a modified alphabet he was already adapting in his head for her four-fingered hands. She watched, with an intensity that almost frightened him. Her eyes tracked every movement of his fingers, like she was memorizing a map to a place she had always wanted to go. Over the next 3 hours, he taught her 12 signs. Hello, goodbye, yes, no, me, you, happy, sad, sky, water, tree, friend. She learned them in minutes, not slowly, not with difficulty. She absorbed each sign, like dry ground absorbing rain. When he introduced a new one, she would practice it 3 times, then combine it with one she already knew. After 2 hours, she signed me happy and pointed at him with a question in her eyes. You friend, she was asking, in a language that had not existed that morning. Ethan signed back, yes, me friend. Something broke open in her face. It was not a smile. It was bigger than a smile. It was the expression of someone who had been trapped in a dark room for their entire life and had just seen a door opened. He came back the next day, and the next, and the next. Each time, he arrived with new signs. He modified them carefully, adjusting for her hand structure. Where human signs used 5 fingers, he redesigned them for 4. Where human signs relied on touching the ear or the mouth, he moved them to the shoulder or the wrist, places that felt natural for her body. He built a bridge between 2 species, using nothing but observation and patience, and the memory of his sister's hands. By the 4th day, she could make full sentences. By the 5th, she was asking questions. Not simple ones, hard ones. Why stars burn? Why others sing but not me? What is your world like? Each question hit Ethan like a punch. Not because they were difficult to answer, but because they proved what he had suspected from the moment he first saw her. She was not slow. She was not broken. She had spent her entire life with a mind full of questions and no way to ask a single one. Her name, he learned from the attendants, was Aethys. Princess Aethys, youngest daughter of Queen Selara. Born with a condition that made her completely unable to produce or hear the Volanthi vocal frequencies. In a civilization built on sound, she was the one person who lived in total silence. The attendants watched Ethan with a mixture of suspicion and wonder. They had cared for Aethys for years, and in all that time, they had never seen her do what she was doing now. She was sitting up straight. She was leaning forward. She was laughing a physical laugh, her shoulders shaking, her mouth open in silent joy, when Ethan taught her the sign for funny and made a silly face. On the 6th day, Aethys signed a sentence that made Ethan stop breathing. I am here. 3 words. The most important 3 words a person can say. I exist. I am real. I have thoughts and feelings. And I am here, in this world. Ethan's eyes burned. He blinked hard and signed back with steady hands. I see you. That evening, Ambassador Vasquez found him in the corridor and pulled him into a side room. Her face was white with anger. I know what you have been doing, she said. I told you to stay at your post. I told you to be invisible. Do you have any idea what could happen if the Volanthi royal court thinks a human is interfering with the princess? I am not interfering. I am teaching her to talk. She is not your responsibility, Corporal. She does not have a language, ma'am. She has no way to tell anyone what she thinks or feels. She is a child, and she is completely alone. Vasquez stared at him for a long time. Then she said, quietly, "If this goes wrong, I cannot protect you." "I understand." Athos was already waiting for him, her hands raised, ready to learn. And somewhere in the palace, a royal attendant reported to the Queen's court that Princess Athos had been seen laughing for the first time in years. The report passed through layers of staff and officials and advisors until it reached a pair of ears that had waited a very long time to hear it. Queen Silera of the Volante Empire had ruled for over 400 years. She had fought wars that burned across star systems. She had signed treaties that brought peace to 100 worlds. She had watched civilizations rise and crumble and rise again. She was old by any measure, wise by every standard, and feared by most who knew her name. But none of that mattered when it came to Athos. Athos was her youngest child, born in what should have been a time of joy. Instead, the birth had been followed by silence. The doctors had discovered the condition within days. The princess could not produce sound. She could not receive it. In a species whose entire existence was built around the voice, she was like a bird born without wings. Silera had tried everything. She had brought the greatest scientists in the empire. She had consulted with telepathic species who could communicate through thought. She had spent fortunes on experimental technologies, sound amplifiers, neural bridges, resonance implants. Nothing worked. Athos's condition was not damage that could be repaired. It was absence. The parts of her brain that other Volanthe used for song simply did not exist. And so the queen had done what she hated most. She had accepted it. She had given Athos the best caretakers, the safest rooms, the most comfortable life. And she had quietly, painfully, stopped hoping. Now a report sat on her desk that said her daughter had been laughing. Because of a human. A low-ranking security officer from a Class Species 7 category that most of the Concord barely noticed. Silera did not believe it. She could not afford to believe it. Hope was a weapon that had cut her too many times. But she was also a mother, and mothers cannot stop themselves from looking. She arranged to watch from a balcony above the East Garden. She told no one except her personal guard. She stood in the shadow of a crystal pillar and looked down. Athos was on the bench. The human was with her, kneeling on the ground across from her, his hands moving in the air between them. At first, Silera did not understand what she was seeing. The human was making shapes with his hands, fast, precise shapes that changed and flowed like water. And Athos was making shapes back, the same kind of shapes, but different, like two people having a conversation in a language made of movement. Silera leaned forward, her grip tightened on the railing. Athos was not just copying the human. She was responding. She was initiating. Her hands moved with speed and confidence and expression, her face alive with emotion, her body leaning forward with a hunger that Silera recognized, because she had felt it herself. It was the hunger to be understood. The human said something with his hands, and Athos threw her head back and laughed. Not a sound. A movement. Her whole body shook with it. Then she signed something back, and the human grinned so wide it changed the shape of his face. They were talking. Her daughter, who had never spoken a word in her life, was talking. Silera watched for 20 minutes. She watched Athos ask questions. She watched Athos tell stories, her hands painting pictures in the air. She watched Athos describe something with such passion that she stood up from the bench and used her whole body to express it, her arms sweeping wide, her fingers dancing. She watched her daughter's mind for the first time step out of its cage. The queen of the Volanthe Empire, who had held her composure through the fall of empires and the death of stars, began to cry. The sound came from deep inside her, a resonance that she could not control, a harmonic cry that vibrated through the crystal walls of the palace. Guards came running. She waved them away. She walked down the stairs to the garden. Her steps were slow. Her vision was blurred. She was not walking as a queen, she was walking as a mother. Ethan saw her first. He froze. The blood left his face. He started to stand, to back away, to kneel, to do something, anything, because the queen of an interstellar empire was walking straight toward him, and he was a nobody from Oregon who had disobeyed every order he had been given. But before he could move, Athos grabbed his sleeve. She tugged it gently, and with calm, steady hands, she signed to him, "Don't be scared. That is my mother." Celara stopped 3 feet away. She was much taller than Ethan. Her skin shifted through shades of deep blue and silver, the colors of powerful emotion in her species. She looked at Ethan, then at Athos, then at their hands. Through a translation device on her wrist, she spoke in a voice that was raw and cracked. "What have you done to my daughter?" "I taught her to talk, Your Majesty." "How?" "With her hands. On my planet, many humans cannot hear. Millions of them. We built languages that use the hands instead of the voice. Complete languages, with grammar and expression and poetry. I modified one of them for her." The queen was silent for a long moment. Then she asked a question that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. "Your species has always had those who cannot hear?" "Yes, Your Majesty, always." "And you did not discard them? You did not consider them broken?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at Athos, who was watching the exchange with wide, curious eyes, her hands still and patient. "No," he said, "we considered them ours." Celara stared at him. Something in her expression shifted, like tectonic plates moving deep underground. She looked at Athos, and raised her hands, awkward and uncertain, and made a clumsy gesture that was clearly meant to be a sign, but was nothing recognizable. Athos looked at her mother's hands. Then she looked at Ethan. Then she gently reached out, took her mother's fingers, and shaped them into the sign for mother. Celara stared at her own hands. Then she looked at her daughter. Then she dropped to her knees, there on the garden floor, in front of a human corporal and a child who had never spoken, and she made the sign again. "Mother." Athos smiled. She signed back, "Daughter." And the queen of the Volanthi Empire, kneeling on the stones of her own garden, looked up at Ethan Calloway with eyes full of tears, and said, Teach me how to speak to my child." The news moved through the palace like fire through dry grass. The queen had knelt before a human. The queen had wept in the garden. The queen had asked a Class 7 primitive to teach her something that 400 years of Volanthi science could not provide. Within hours, the entire Grand Harmonic Summit was buzzing with it. Delegates from a dozen species whispered in corridors and exchanged glances across ceremonial halls. Some were curious, some were confused, some were angry. Ambassador Vasquez found Ethan in his quarters that evening. She stood in the doorway and looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "The Queen has requested your presence tomorrow morning," she said slowly. "She wants you to work with her linguistic scholars to build a formal version of whatever you have been teaching the princess." Ethan sat on his cot. "Is that an order, ma'am?" "That is a request from the most powerful monarch in 3 star systems, so yes. Corporal, I would call it an order." She paused. "You understand what you have done, don't you? I taught a kid to talk. You have changed the relationship between humanity and the Volanthi Empire. In 1 week, with your hands." Ethan did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, which was probably the smartest thing he had done since arriving. The next morning, he was brought to a room in the inner palace that he had not known existed. It was filled with Volanthi scholars, linguists, and communication experts. They were tall and brilliant, and they looked at him like scientists examining an interesting insect. But the queen was there too, and when she spoke, everyone listened. "This human has built a language for my daughter in 7 days," Celara said. "You will now help him build it properly. You will give it structure. You will give it depth. You will make it real. And you will do it with respect. Ethan worked with them for 12 hours a day over the next week. It was the hardest work of his life. He explained the principles of sign language, how it was not just gestures or signals, but a true language with grammar and syntax, and the ability to express abstract ideas. He showed them the history of sign languages on Earth, how they have developed independently in dozens of countries, how they were as complex and beautiful as any spoken language. The Volanthi scholars were stunned, not by the complexity, which they could appreciate as linguists, but by the concept itself. It had never occurred to them, in thousands of years of civilization, to build a visual language. Their entire culture was so deeply rooted in sound that the idea of communication through movement was like suggesting that water could flow upward. It was not impossible. It was simply unthinkable. Together, they built what they called Volanthi Manual Language. Ethan provided the framework from Earth's sign languages. The scholars adapted it to Volanthi hand structure, body language, and cultural concepts. They created signs for ideas that had no human equivalent. They built grammar rules that reflected the way Volanthi thought. And in the evenings, Ethan taught the Queen. Selara was not a natural signer. She had spent her entire life communicating through song, and her hands felt clumsy and uncertain when asked to carry meaning. But she practiced with a determination that was almost frightening. She would sit in her private chambers and repeat a sign 50 times until it was smooth. She would make Ethan correct her over and over until the shape was exactly right. It must be perfect, she told him. She deserves perfect. The first time Queen Selara signed I love you to Aethys, they were in the garden where it had all begun. Both hands open, crossed over the chest, then extended outward toward the other person. 3 movements, 2 seconds. Aethys watched her mother's hands. She understood instantly. Her face changed. It went through surprise and disbelief, and then settled into something that Ethan could only describe as a rival, the look of someone who had finally come home after a very long journey. Aethys signed back, I love you. Several diplomats from other species had gathered on the balcony above, watching. The garden was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. But the moment did not go unchallenged. The Dravathi hegemony, a powerful military species that had long considered themselves the dominant force in the Concord, pushed back hard. Their lead ambassador, a broad-shouldered creature named Vorath, stood before the Summit Council and argued that humanity was manipulating the situation for political gain. The humans are a primitive species using a parlor trick to curry favor with the Volanthi crown, he said. Hand-waving is not language, it is theater. The Volanthi are too proud to admit that they were simply too blind to develop such a thing themselves, and so they reward the humans for pointing out their failure. The room was tense. Other species shifted uncomfortably. Some agreed with Vorath privately. Others were not sure what to think. Queen Selara rose from her throne. The hall went dead silent. The humans will present the final harmonic gift at tomorrow's closing ceremony, she announced. And they will not present music. They will present language itself. And you will watch. The closing ceremony of the Grand Harmonic Summit was held in the Great Resonance Hall, a vast chamber of crystal that had been designed to amplify sound to its most beautiful form. Every species in the Concord was represented. Thousands of delegates filled the curved seats. The air hummed with anticipation. One by one, species had presented their harmonic gifts, songs, compositions, vibrations, frequencies of light and heat, and electromagnetic energy. Each was stunning in its own way. Then it was humanity's turn. Last, as always. Least, as always. Ethan walked to the center of the hall. He was wearing his dress uniform, simple and dark. He looked small in that enormous space, a single human, standing where civilizations had performed. But he was not alone. Beside him walked Princess Aethys. The hall fell absolutely silent. Ethan and Athos faced each other. They raised their hands, and they began to sign. It was a poem. Ethan had written it with Athos over the past 3 days. It was about silence, and what it means to live inside it. It was about the hands, and what they can carry when the voice cannot. It was about the space between two people, and how language, any language, is just a bridge across that space. Athos signed her parts with a grace that took the breath from the room. Her hands moved like birds, like water, like light itself. She was not reciting, she was performing. She was speaking with her whole body, and every person in that hall, regardless of species, could feel the meaning pouring from her. When they finished, the silence lasted for 3 full seconds. Then the hall erupted. The Valanthi began a deep harmonic resonance, their equivalent of the highest praise. Other species joined, adding their own sounds, until the crystal walls of the hall vibrated with a single, unified note that could be felt in the bones. Ethan stood in the center of it and tried not to cry. In the back of the hall, Ambassador Vorath of the Dravathi hegemony sat rigidly in his seat. His face was hard, his jaw was tight, but slowly, almost as if he did not want to be seen, he looked down at his own hands. He had 4 fingers on each, just like the Valanthi. He raised one hand and made the sign that Ethan had taught at the beginning of the poem, the sign for thank you. It was a small gesture, but in that hall, on that day, nothing was small. 3 weeks after the Grand Harmonic Summit ended, Corporal Ethan Calloway was called into a meeting he did not expect. Ambassador Vasquez was there, along with 2 Valanthi officials and a human general he had only ever seen on screens. They told him he was being reassigned, not punished, promoted. A new joint initiative had been created between the Human Diplomatic Corps and the Valanthi Empire. It was called the Galactic Accessibility and Communication Corps, and its purpose was to develop communication systems for individuals across the galaxy who could not use their species' primary form of language. Ethan was to lead the human side of the operation. He sat in his chair and stared at them. "I am a corporal," he said. "I guard doors." The general leaned forward. "You were a corporal, now you are something else. Accept it, son." He accepted it. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. As word spread about what Ethan had done for Princess Athos, reports began coming in from across the Concord. Species after species revealed, quietly and sometimes with great shame, that they too had members who fell outside their dominant communication systems. The Threlki, a species that communicated through bioluminescent patterns on their skin, had individuals born without functioning light glands. They had lived in darkness their entire lives, unable to say a single word to their families. The Urani, who spoke through complex pheromone signals, had members whose glands did not produce the right chemicals. They had been institutionalized for generations, locked away because no one knew what to do with them. And in every case, the story was the same. No one had tried to build them a different language. No one had thought to ask whether their hands, or their bodies, or their movements could carry meaning. The idea simply had not occurred to anyone, except humans, because humans had been doing it for thousands of years. On Earth, deaf communities had built sign languages independently in dozens of countries. Blind individuals had been given Braille. People who could not move their bodies had been given eye-tracking systems and communication boards. Humanity's history was filled with moments where someone could not speak the way everyone else did. And instead of giving up, someone else had said, "Then we will find another way." It was not a grand philosophy. It was not advanced technology. It was something much simpler and much rarer. It was the refusal to leave anyone behind. Ethan built a team. Linguists, neurologists, occupational therapists, and sign language experts from Earth were brought in to work alongside alien scholars from every corner of the Concord. They called themselves the Bridge Builders, and they worked around the clock. Within 6 months, they had developed 3 new manual languages for 3 different species. Within a year, the number was 9. Individuals who had spent decades in silence were, for the first time, able to tell their families their names, their fears, their dreams. Princess Aethys enrolled in the Velanthi Imperial Academy that same year. She was the first deaf Velanthi to attend in the institution's 3,000-year history. She did not struggle. She excelled. Her professors reported that she thought in ways that other students did not, that her perspective, shaped by a lifetime of observing a world she could not hear, gave her insights that hearing students missed entirely. Her thesis, completed 2 years later, was written entirely in Velanthi manual language, with a printed translation. It argued that silence was not the absence of perception, but a different form of it, and that every species that had ignored its silent members had lost an entire dimension of understanding. The thesis was translated into 47 languages. It became one of the most read academic papers in Concord history. Meanwhile, Ethan made a call to Earth. He called his sister, Mia. "I need you to come here," he said. "Where is here?" "A planet about 600 light-years from home. I need you to meet someone." Mia arrived on Sonhar Prime on a Tuesday. She was 30 years old, deaf since birth, with dark hair and quick hands, and a smile that could light up a room. Ethan brought her to the garden terrace, and Aethys was waiting. The two of them stood face to face, a human woman from Oregon, and a Velanthi princess from the other side of the galaxy. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Mia raised her hands and signed, "Hello, my name is Mia. I am Ethan's sister." Aethys's eyes went wide. She looked at Ethan. He nodded. Aethys raised her own hands and signed back, "Hello, Mia. My name is Aethys. Your brother saved my life." Mia looked at Ethan. Her eyes were full of tears. She signed to him, "You taught her our language?" "I taught her a version of it. She did the rest herself." Mia turned back to Aethys and signed, "Then you and I have a lot to talk about." The image of the two of them, a human and an alien, sitting together on a stone bench and signing to each other with fluid, effortless grace, was captured by a Concord media crew. It was broadcast across every system in the galaxy. It became one of the most watched moments in the history of interstellar communication. Two people from different worlds, neither of whom could hear a sound, talking to each other as easily as old friends. 5 years after the summit, the Galactic Concord voted to upgrade humanity's status from Class 7 primitive species to full founding member. It was an unprecedented leap. No species had ever been elevated so quickly or so far. The official statement read, "For the contribution of adaptive language systems and for the recognition that communication is a right, not a privilege." There was a ceremony. Ethan attended. He wore a new uniform. He gave a short speech, which he hated, because he was still not a man who liked attention. He said something about how the real credit belonged to the millions of deaf humans throughout history who had built languages from nothing, and to his sister, who had taught him that silence was never empty. Then he left the ceremony early and went to the garden. The crystal towers glowed against a darkening sky. The pools of water reflected 2 moons. The silver-leafed trees whispered in a wind that smelled like rain. Ambassador Aethys, as she was now known, the Velanthi Empire's first deaf diplomat, found him there. She was tall now, grown into her full height, her skin shifting through confident shades of deep blue and gold. She moved with the grace of someone who knew exactly who she was. She sat beside him on the stone bench where they had first met. She signed, "You were told to stay quiet." He signed back, "Some things are more important than orders." She smiled, "You gave me words, Ethan." He shook his head. "No, the words were always yours." I just showed you where your hands could put them. They sat together in the garden as the stars came out, one by one, above a galaxy that was learning, slowly and imperfectly, that the measure of a civilization is not how loudly it can speak, but how carefully it listens for those who cannot. And between a soldier and a princess, in the comfortable silence of an old friendship, the quiet was not empty.